Now, back a number of years ago, about 1998, I was deer hunting with a friend of mine here in central North Carolina, Chatham County to be exact. I was hunting with a good friend of mine on some property that his family owned. If you know anything about central and eastern North Carolina, it's the number of hog farms in the area and certain times of the year. Talk about stink. We were in a beautiful area, and we'd already scouted out where we were going to hunt. We got on our stands and got settled. Come 10 o'clock, we decided to meet up and see if we could not find a new spot for the late afternoon. We poured coffee and began looking at our maps, making a plan. All of a sudden, my buddy Bob looks at me and says, "You hear that?" I listened. I caught the faintest sound of what sounded like a man or a dog, screaming or howling. "What is that?" I'd asked. We both just stood there for a few minutes, sort of talking about what it sounded like. Just then, our third buddy came and rejoined us, saying, "Hey, you guys hear that?" Like I said, we were kind of taking a break, drinking coffee, smoking cigarettes, and talking in normal tones, while the call, scream, whatever it was unusual, we very quickly blew it off. That's the thing with youth, is simply you can blow off what you don't understand. I suppose some 20 minutes had gone by, and the three of us pretty much on our way to a second location about a mile from where we are now. We're taking a slow pace, as it's deer season. We take 4 or 5 steps, then pause and look and listen to see if we might have stirred something up. Any deer hunter is familiar with the cadence and how it's important to not disturb other hunters' hunts. We came to an open section of woods. Beautiful spot. Large hardwood trees had formed a very nice canopy over us, and you could see a couple of 100 yards out, all around. Just then, a second scream like before, powerful low frequency, but clear, not something we recognized. Then, without warning, our third buddy, Jake, let out a scream in response. Scared the bejeebers out of us both, and we were trying to get him to stop, but he bellowed like mad in reply. Finally, Bob reached over and thumped him in the belly, which did stop him. He coughed. Then I said, "You idiot. You have no idea what you're responding to, and if you hadn't noticed that thing was closer than it was the first time." Then he starts acting all hurt, and Bob, having thumped him in the eye, told him to knock it off, or he was going to have to fight the two of us. Naturally, he started wanting to make light of the thing as a joke. So I told him, "Let's hope that's how it winds up going down." We didn't know exactly where. Whatever made that sound was, but it was darn sure we had a good idea where we were thanks to Jake. "Okay, let's spread out a bit, 3 meters apart, and move this way toward our next hunting spot. Jake, I don't care if that thing starts playing at Freebird. You keep your mouth shut." We walked for a good 30 minutes, and Bob said this: "We aren't far from where we want to be for the next hunt, but it's way early for setting up. Let's have a seat and eat some lunch." That sounded like a good idea. We had great visibility. It wasn't like something was going to sneak up on us. So we made a small fire, boiled some water, and made ramen noodles. A great staple, even today. We'd gotten our stuff made up, ate, and talked of hunting, and anything else that sort of came to mind, and began putting out the fire, putting stuff away, when all of a sudden, that scream came back again. Only it couldn't have been more than a few 100 yards away at most. Almost at the same time, I noticed the air seemed to stop moving, and dead silence fell. Not a sound from anything. Talk about eerie. It was then that the other guys looked all like the blood had dropped out of their faces. We could clearly hear the sound of something coming toward us, but we couldn't see where or what it was. Jake looked like he was about to cry. Bob didn't look much better. Just then, I had realized we had weapons and we had survival gear. We could make a stand against whatever it was moving around us, no more than about 70 yards out. Just to our left was about 3 trees, which had fallen and created a bit of cover. I looked at the guys and said, on my say-so, grab all your stuff and get over to those trees. Get inside of them and take up back-to-back positions. Ready? Go. We took off, got inside the trees and took our guns up, and we're scanning about eagerly. Apparently, our sudden movements had alerted it, but we needed to be under some sort of cover, rather than out in the open like we were. Now, just as I started saying cover, whatever area was in front of us, each of us felt a sudden rush of wind come in like a wave. I mean dead silence 1 minute, and then suddenly, a wave of wind came through. Not hard, but it just seemed completely out of place, and an odor came in with it, like nothing I have ever smelt. It was like heavily concentrated body odor. If you've ever been in a locker room, that was not quite up to standards of the cleanliness of today, then you know what I mean. Combine that with the smell of musk, and you get what I mean. It was nasty, very strong enough that I looked over at both my guys, and we got tears in our eyes. You guys see anything? They say they didn't, but something stunk to the high heavens. Okay, I'm gonna try something, I said. Don't freak out and don't panic. Remember, we have weapons, and if we stay together, we'll be fine. They nodded affirmatively. Hey, I shouted. We're over here, and we're armed. I heard nothing. Then I said, you might get one of us, but I guarantee the other 2 will get you. I tried to use a strong command voice like the police often use to help control a situation. It was a bluff, but hey. We will leave and never return. I have some whiskey for you here as a sign of my word. I was thankful I had a gifting pouch with me now. I'd gotten to the point that I've never left it at home anymore, but almost left it at home today. Just wasn't expecting this sort of complication. Suddenly comes an angry scream, like nothing I have ever heard in my life, like nothing I have ever heard before. I was carrying a rifle, and I located the source, as best I could, then told my guys, put your fingers in your ears. They did, and I determined as best I could where the scream had come from, took aim and fired. The report of the gun was deafening, and now I couldn't hear much of anything, but because I warned the guys, they still had their hearing. Mind you, I wasn't actually trying to hit the creature, just let it know we were armed, and make it think twice about attacking. Then, being brave, I yelled out, if you want to fight, then let's do it. If you want to let it go, okay, then let's do that. But we are leaving, with or without your permission. I looked over at my guys. You guys are my ears for now. I can't hear a thing. And so Jake said, I can hear something on 2 feet over near where you fired. And so I asked him, is it moving away, coming closer, or what? Seems to be circling over this way, getting behind us, like it doesn't want us to go further in, Bob had told me. In about 10 or so minutes, it had traversed around and behind us. It hadn't made any more sounds. Okay, guys, let's head back the way we came in. Just head back towards the truck. The guys looked at me funny. Look, guys, in about 4 hours, it's going to be getting dark. I do not want to be here when it's dark, with whatever that thing is out there, all interested in us. I was turned and talking to Jake when all of a sudden, Bob opened fire with his slung gun. Bob, what are you shooting at? His face had lost all of its color, and he looked at me and said, "It's a devil." He was racking to reload his shotgun. A devil? He looked at me. I saw it step out. It looked like a wolf, but it was on two legs like a man. He looked like he might go catatonic on me. Keep it together. It's a Dogman. They are dangerous, but they know what guns are, and that we have them. I was trying to be as cool as I could, so I did not freak the guys out. I have no idea if Dogman knew what guns are. That was the story at the moment in time. Then I wondered for a moment, what was going to keep me from freaking out? Okay, we're heading back to the truck. We're going to walk at as quick as pace as we can. No running, no freaking out. And no one fire off a shot unless one coming to attack us, and let us know if you see it coming at us. They looked like they weren't sure. Hey, you guys can stay here if you want, and when dark comes, my guess is you'll have very little chance of surviving. My ears were still ringing from the guns, but the guys got up and began moving back toward the truck. I estimated that it wouldn't take us more than an hour and a half to get to the truck and get away. Once we were in the truck, there was going to be no stopping us. Bob, when we get to the truck, I want you to take up a position in the back and ride shotgun for us if something comes at us from the front. Then we'll bang on the rear window. He nodded. No one talked. We just kept moving forward. However, after about 5 minutes, I heard a call like a wolf that you hear in nature shows, long and drawn out. The sound of it made all of us pause, as it sounded like the thing had not moved. Then it called again and again. All of a sudden, we heard another call from further away, like an answer. I had no way of knowing if the creature was calling for help or calling to locate, but I can only assume it was calling for reinforcements. I decided we need to do our best to be gone from there before the Wolfman cavalry arrived. We made our way progressively, making sure we have our retreat covered and moving back as quickly as possible. Finally, with the sun still up in the sky, we arrived at the truck. Without a word, Bob was in the back and Jake in the passenger side. I only stopped long enough to drop my gear and put it in the back. I grabbed my pistol, 2 spare clips, and set them on the seat next to me. I looked over at Jake and told him, "Keep that shotgun loaded and ready to use if we have to." Just looked like he was scared to the point of being frozen. I reached over and poked him. "We need you. You need to get in the game." He nodded. I later apologized to Jake over hot dogs for being hard on him. After all, this was a hunting trip where the tables got turned, and unless you've lived it, the level of fear can be debilitating. Not to mention, poor Jake had never heard of a Dogman, and Bigfoot was just a joke. And suddenly, he was caught up in the middle of some stuff he'd never dealt with before in his life. I have to give him credit. He did good, all things considered. I cranked up the truck and began heading down a dirt road that had rained a day before, so there was no choking dust to deal with. Suddenly, Bob yelled to stop and beat on the back glass. I stopped and jumped out, asked what was up. All he could do was point. The look of shock that was on his face spoke volumes. There, in the distance, a good 100 feet, maybe 130, behind us was the devil. At least it sure looked like one. Ears turned up, snout clearly visible, and standing way too tall to be a man. And while I have never actually seen a Bigfoot, I could see the proportion were all wrong for it to be one. I'm probably one of the few Bigfooters who would have seen a Dogman, not a Bigfoot. It just glared at us like it was saying, "Don't come back." It turned to the side, and I could clearly see the profile. The head looked like a giant version of a German Shepherd, only the teeth were more like what you'd see on a baboon. It had what looked like a longer neck, and it tapered out to the shoulders. The upper body was heavily built and appeared to be very muscular. The arms were long, but not overly long, and it appeared to have hands like a human. Only the fingers seemed longer than they should have been. I speculate that it might have had claws that gave it that appearance, but I'm guessing this now. I did notice a short tail that seemed to hang down. I'm not sure why that detail seemed to stick out like it did, but I have learned that you see the darndest things when you're scared. I could recall seeing it that it was on 2 legs, but for the life of me, I can't say if its legs were like a human or a dog. I noticed the tail, and can't tell you about the legs, but that's how it goes. I get back in, drove like mad until we'd come out of the woods, and returned to the small town of Silk Hope, which is a small unincorporated community consisting of several churches, a volunteer fire department, and the local school and a little country store. I stopped, got out, and grabbed the guys and said, "Okay, we didn't see anything, got it?" And Jake just said, "Are you kidding me? We need to call the TV stations." I looked at him and reminded him the reason we had to escape was due to him returning a call he didn't understand. How will you think they will play this on TV? What that was a Dogman. Bigfoots I might take a chance on, but Dogmen are dangerous and might as well eat you as look at you, I said. What? Jake looked at me like he didn't understand. Dude, you go to anyone, cops, TV, anyone. You're on your own. Don't mention my name. Don't mention his name. And trust me, not a day after that goes out on the TV, you'll be wishing you'd kept your mouth shut. I then paused and said, "I want a hot dog. You want a hot dog, Bob? Want a hot dog? Hot dogs are on me, guys." We went in and chowed down on about a dozen of them, and a couple of sodas each. I took them back to where we'd all met up, and they'd gotten their cars and headed home. On Monday, I came into work and was asking a buddy of mine about the hunting down in Chatham County. He said there were far too many feral hogs in that area now, and they'd pretty much driven the deer away from there. I just nodded, but as I recalled, I didn't see much of any sign of feral hogs. I had a feeling something else was at work on that issue. So, this all happened way back in the late 1990s, when I was a college sophomore. Me and the girl I was dating at the time had been going steady for about 8 months, and since she was my real first girlfriend, my mom was pretty keen to meet her, and what better time than the holidays to introduce her to the folks. During the week before Christmas, my mom's family traditionally held quite a large gathering up at my uncle's place over in Sandy, Oregon, my home state. Pretty much all of my extended family headed out there year after year from all over the Portland area, and since they'd gotten word that I was bringing my girlfriend, the hype to meet her was huge. I won't lie, I was kind of nervous that they'd embarrass me in front of her, but that anxiety was totally misplaced. She got on really well with all of them, and despite some playful humiliation when a cousin of mine told her the story of how I literally peed my pants at the Haunted Mansion ride back when I was a kid, they were a credit to me. When it came to driving her back home, she seemed to be more into me than ever. We'd agreed to drive back down to Eugene at like 7 p.m., so I wouldn't be too tired driving back. But since we had such a good time, we stayed way later than we had ever planned to, and didn't get on the road until like 10:30 that evening. In the hopes of making the journey a little faster, I ended up taking the Oregon 211 instead of just sticking to the I-5 South for the whole drive. Annoyingly, This did not actually make the journey any faster, but point being, the 211 was pretty much surrounded by farms, or these huge swaths of dense pine forest. As you can imagine, big stretches of it aren't lit very well at all, and for some parts of the drive, we were moving through complete darkness, saved only by our car's headlights. But honestly, I wasn't all that worried about it. I was pretty good at reading a map, and once I was back on the I-5, a road I know pretty well, I figured everything would be all good. So we're just cruising along, in high spirits, talking about how goofy some of my family were. But generally, my girlfriend was singing their praises, telling how she could not wait to meet them again. It's right around then that we hit a section of highway that descends down this big old hill, leading up to the bridge crossing over Deep Creek. There, the highway is sandwiched by some very dense forest, the densest you're likely to ever see. And there is absolutely nothing lighting up the highway. So the only thing we could see from the front seats of the car is like maybe 20 to 30 feet that our headlights are illuminating, and pretty much nothing else. But like I said, we're in high spirits, completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Right as the highway starts to level off, something darts across the front of us so fast and so suddenly that I barely missed smashing into it. I brake so hard that I almost gave the pair of us a whiplash. Then, when we're both stopped, both me and my girlfriend are in a complete frenzy of, oh my, did you see that? What was that? There are plenty of deer in that area of Oregon, plenty of coyotes too. But the thing that ran out in front of us was way too big to be a coyote, and something about the way it moved gave me this gut feeling that it was not a deer either. The shape was just too slender, almost like whatever was out there had moved on 2 legs, not 4. Now, next thing, and I know how completely dumb this sounds in retrospect, but my curiosity just got the better of me. I decided that I wanted to investigate. So, again, this was also incredibly dumb. I turned the car like 90 degrees on the highway so I could point our headlights into the woods. Yes, this could have caused a horrible accident if another car had come along at the same time I was doing this. But was I thinking straight at the time? Of course not. You see, as a kid growing up in the Pacific Northwest, I'd heard a lot of stories about Bigfoot and Sasquatch. I'd be lying if I said they didn't capture my imagination. Now, I'm not saying that I thought I'd caught a glimpse of a Gigantopithecus or anything. I know the stories are mostly exact that. Just stories. But part of me just wanted to be sure. So, like I said, I turned my car 90 degrees, turned on my high beams, and stepped out of the driver's side onto the highway. I stare off into the trees for a minute or two, but I don't see anything. Nothing is moving. The whole scene was as quiet as the grave. But as I'm looking, I just get this feeling in the pit of my stomach, and start to feel as if I'd made a huge error of judgment. It was one of the most intensely terrifying feelings that I've ever felt in my life. A feeling like I was being watched by something predatory. I know it's a huge cliche, and the whole "I felt like I was being watched" thing is such a tired old trope, but I really don't know any other way to phrase it. My heart was pounding. The hairs on the back of my neck are now standing on end, and my guts turned to ice. Without turning my back on the woods, where I expected the danger to come from, I started edging back towards the car. And then suddenly, out of nowhere, I practically jump out of my skin when I hear the car's horn let off one long, excruciatingly loud extended blast. I mean, it scared me so bad that I almost straight up peed my pants. Haunted mansion style, like when I was a kid. My first thought was that my girlfriend has ended up leaning on the horn as she climbed over into the driver's seat for some reason, maybe to get my attention. She'd done that once or twice before. But as I turned back around, she's still on the passenger side, but that she's actually leaning over to push on the horn in what was evidently a frenzied attempt to get my attention. I run back to the car and ask her if she's okay. She doesn't say a single word to me. She points off to a spot about 50 feet away from where we were parked in. I spin my head around to see what she's pointing at. That's when I see it. What was, without a shadow of a doubt, the thing that had run in front of our car just a few minutes prior. Lit up by the residual light of our high beams, what I saw was really, obviously a man, but he was covered in animal fur, what looked like a mishmash of deer skins, bear skins, and elk skins, and on his head, secured in a way I'm not even sure of, were these antlers. At the time, because of how close it was to the holidays, I remember the words reindeer man just kind of flashing through my head. Maybe in the naive hope that the dude was dressed that way out of some misdirected festive spirit. But he certainly didn't seem in any kind of festive spirit. Not in the least bit. Like, I couldn't see his eyes because the weird kind of head covering he had on. But I could see his mouth. And at first, he kind of looked like he was giving us a smile. Only as I looked, I could see it wasn't a smile at all. This guy was just baring his teeth at us, like the way chimps do, as some kind of warning. After that, he turned and walked off into the forest. Obviously, right after that, me and my girlfriend just got out of there, got back on the road towards the I-5. It took us both a while to calm our nerves, but my girlfriend was particularly shaken up. That's because she'd seen something that I had not. And as we drove on, she explained exactly what that was. While I'd been staring off into the woods, looking for Sasquatch or whatever, she noticed him out of her peripheral vision, but was basically frozen in fear for a moment or two as she watched him slowly walk towards me. Or rather, walking isn't the right word. From how she described it, this guy was stalking, the way a hunter might stalk a deer. The way she put it, she had to summon pretty much all of her courage to be able to lean over and honk the horn the way she did. Then, when Reindeer Man had heard the honking, he'd backed off a little, and before I saw him, like I said, he just kind of froze in place before disappearing. I did a fair amount of online research when I got home, to try and find out if anybody else had any run-ins with this guy, but there was absolutely nothing online about him. There are plenty of crazy survivalist types up here in the Pacific Northwest. I'm guessing he was one of those. But they tend to be pretty open about their existence. Sometimes even advertise themselves as militiamen or whatever. Whereas the Reindeer Man seemed like he was living completely off the grid. I don't live in Oregon anymore. Me and my girlfriend during the encounter broke up at the end of college. But when we were still together, I happened to be driving down towards Eugene. I always avoided the stretch of highway that I saw the Reindeer Man on. I've told this story a lot over the years, and some people honestly just think I'm making it up, like a campfire tale or something. But it's not a tale. It's not made up. And it's definitely not just intended to be some dumb, spoopy story. It's most definitely a warning to anybody traveling on that road at night. Because if my girlfriend wasn't with me when he ran out in front of the car, if she wasn't there to spot him before he crept up on me, only to scare him off with a blast of the horn, I honestly might not be here to warn you. So please, this holiday season, drive careful, drive slow, and do not stop, for any reason, on dark, deserted stretches a forest highway. Back when I was 16, 17, and even up to 18, my father and I were very close. In fact, we would often, instead of getting hotels or anything like that, we would just camp out on the side of the road. Literally, my dad would pull over, and we would just walk, maybe 200 yards into the woods, pitch a tent, and there we go. We'd done this more times than I could possibly count, so this wasn't scary for any of us. We were pretty well versed in the outdoors, camping in many areas that were uncomfortable to many people, just kind of out there, many times along the highway because of the long road trips we used to make. We often didn't have time to find a hotel, or want to. My dad and I were much more adventurous, and found the thrill of hiking and sleeping in the woods much more exciting. However, we did have one bad experience. We were in Northern California, somewhere north of Sacramento to be exact, but not quite to the Oregon border yet. We had pulled over somewhere along the road, and we decided to camp out, probably about 100 feet or so from the road. I remember that very distinctly, because this time we had camped much closer to the truck. I think it was because my dad wanted to make sure he can get his supplies easier, for whatever reason this time, and the highway was much more audible. So, everything was normal. We fell asleep that night, and as we were getting up the next morning dismantling the tent, my father, who had walked off a bit in the woods to go explore and go relieve himself in the morning, was running back to me, saying we gotta double time it and load the truck up. Somebody is coming after us. I just listened to my dad, because he's never fearful in the woods. So we loaded up the truck. I kept trying to look back, but did not see anything. We loaded up in probably about 10 minutes, which is record time for both of us. We got out of there and back on the road. My dad seemed very unnerved, very panicked, very unlike him in nature. He's always extremely relaxed, very knowledgeable, very secure in this environment. For him to act like this, something was clearly off. I began poking and prodding for answers, and after a few minutes, he opened up. He said he saw about an 8 to 9 foot tall man, what he described as covered in animal skins, or maybe it was like an upright walking deer. He wasn't too sure, but it looked like a man with large antlers or a headpiece. I remember being so confused, but he said this man's face was all wrong, distorted, and glowing white eyes. What was weird with his description is he said that this 8 to 9 foot tall man was so covered in these animal skins, it was hard to tell if he was really that hairy or just so well disguised in animal skins, and said it looks like he had a crude axe in his right hand that he was dragging against the ground. When I tried to ask more about the purpose of this man being out there, that maybe somehow we had encroached on his territory, my father dismissed that, and said judging by the look in his eyes and his face, he looked partially human, but something else. I never knew what my father meant. Now that I'm much older, and that experience is so far in the past, I almost wonder if he's speaking about a Wendigo, since I know so much about them now. Unfortunately, my father passed away only 2 years after I turned 18. It was right before my 21st birthday party, actually, and so I'll always wonder what he truly saw in the woods that day. Could it have been a Wendigo? Could it have been a Sasquatch? Or something else entirely? This story begins the day after I moved into my new house. I had just moved from my apartment, which was in a bad neighborhood, with lots of bad things happening there. But that's a whole other story. So, I had just moved into my new house, a small 2-bedroom house. The kitchen was right in front of the master bedroom, and the secondary bedroom was right off the living room. I had my mother and 2 siblings living with me. They took the very large master, while I took the secondary bedroom. Anyway, this encounter took place pretty late in the night, right around 11 p.m. Everybody had gone to sleep, so I was pretty excited that I got the house all to myself. I decided that I would do the dishes to help out my mother, then play some games on my Xbox for the rest of the night. I walked into the kitchen with my dog and started doing up the dishes. About halfway through them, I started feeling really uneasy. I started thinking that it was just an unexpected anxiety attack, which I get pretty often, so I didn't really think much of it. I paused, decided that maybe a glass of water would help. While I was sipping my water, I started to hear my dog growling from the living room. I say my dog, but he really is my mother's dog. He is a very, very good guard dog, as in will destroy an intruder in a heartbeat type of guard dog. So I hear him growling, a very low growl, a quiet growl. Me being the stupid 17-year-old who I am, I decided I was going to go see what he was doing. I put down my glass, walked into the living room, where both my puppy and mother's dog were standing by the front door, their nose in the crack of it. I tiptoed up my way to the door, listening very carefully. All I heard was a faint scratching noise. I assumed it was just a raccoon, or one of the stray cats that frequented our house, because we would always leave food for them. I took a peek out the front window, which is located right beside the door. Well, I didn't see anything. Just the dark yard and porch illuminated softly by the glow of the streetlight in the very front of the house. I told the dogs to chill out before they woke up the entire family. After they settled down a bit, I went back to finish up the dishes and think about what games I was going to play. As I was washing a plate, I got that uneasy feeling again. The feeling in the pit of your stomach that just feels like something is very wrong. I tried brushing it off, but it was coming on so strong. All of a sudden, I got the feeling as though somebody was behind me, staring at me, silently watching me. My uneasy feeling turned into scared, then stress. I was so uneasy that I whispered to myself, "Something bad is going to happen. I just know it." The floor began rumbling as though someone was running on it, running up behind me as my back was turned away from the entry to the kitchen. It rumbled so hard. The pounding of the footsteps was so loud. I didn't know what to do except put my hands over my ears to block out sound. It ran up behind me, and it slammed me into the kitchen counter, leaving a large purple bruise on my stomach. As soon as it all started, it stopped. Nothing but silence in the small kitchen. While checking my stomach, I waited, just to see if anything else was going to happen. But nothing did. The room fell quiet. I began panicking, feeling so scared about what had just happened. I finally got the courage to turn around, and as I did, I sighed in relief. My big-eyed pupper was sitting in the doorway, staring up at me. I walked over to her and hugged her, then hooked her up to a leash to take her out before I went to bed. At this point, it was about 12 p.m., and I was so scared and exhausted from that experience, I just decided it was the sleep my body was desperately craving but had not received, causing me to think something happened when it really did not. Though it doesn't explain the bruise forming on my stomach, I said to my pup, hard to believe that my mind could conjure up something so scary. She was hooked up, and when we walked out on the porch, normally we have 4 baby stray cats that basically live out there, but they were nowhere in sight. I assumed they took cover at the neighbor's house. I walked little pupper into the yard, a little ways from the side of the house where the kitchen window was. Now, I wasn't in front of the kitchen window. I was at the front of the yard, but I could see the kitchen window from where I was standing. I looked down and talked to my pup. telling her what a good girl she is and how beautiful she looked. You know, what all puppy mamas do. She looked up at me and wagged her tail in delight. But then her mood suddenly changed as then her neck snapped to where the kitchen window was. When I say snapped, I mean she turned her head so fast, I for real thought she was going to break her neck. It startled me, so I naturally took a couple steps backwards, trying to calm down from the scare. I glanced over to where she was looking, just a small quick glance, and to my surprise, I actually saw something. I wasn't expecting to see anything, so I had a double take at the sight of this thing. We both sat and stared, trying to see what it was. It looked like a tall black silhouette, maybe 8 feet tall, with a very large chest. I remember the chest so well, because it stuck out so far, like scarily far. The figure looked thin in the face, but quite large in the rest of the body. It was staring over the large hedge that was in front of our kitchen window. It was staring into the window, like it was waiting, silently, for somebody or something to move inside the house. I'm guessing my dog's eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, because she let out a small woof at this creature. As soon as she did this, the creature turned his head and stared at me with huge green eyes. My heart sank. The way its eyes were reflecting the light made me instantly think that what I was standing in front of was a giant 7 to 8 foot tall animal. It was silent. No sound. No nothing. In fact, I was so focused on the creature that I had failed to realize that the night insects had gone silent. There was no noise, except for the static sound of the energy coming from the city. I froze, while my puppy began barking loudly and violently. What could this be? Am I seeing things? Is this real? I scooped my pup in my arms, ran in the house. All the while, the same pounding and hearing the loud thudding footsteps as the previous encounter that took place an hour earlier. I ran so fast that I nearly tripped over my own feet. I darted indoors, basically tossing my pooch on the couch, locking the door as fast as I could, leaning against the door, and I listened for whatever it was that chased us in. I also held the door closed, thinking it would actually do something to protect us from that thing. All I could hear was the sound of my heavy breaths from running. My dog's barking must have disturbed my family, because my mother came out of her room, saw me holding the door closed. She saw that I was distressed, wrapped her arms around me, telling me everything was okay, and asking what happened. I couldn't get the story out. For some reason, my mind told me not to tell her, because I knew that she would not believe me. So, I made up a story about how one of the neighbors startled me, and assured her that I was okay. To this day, she still does not know the story. None of my family does, and I still don't know what that creature was. But I do know one thing. It's going to haunt my mind for a very long time. The events I'm about to describe are very true, and I will take them to my grave. These events occurred around 2013 or 2014 midsummer in a small town in rural New Hampshire. Both stories also happened with one of my friend's friend, being present at the time, and he witnessed the same things that I did. The first event that took place was on a warm summer night. My friend and I live in the same town, only about 2 miles from each other. At the time, I had my license and he did not, so I would drive out to his house, hang out, play video games, or I would pick him up and drive back to my place to hang out. Right down the hill from us and my place is this old textile mill that has been closed for a while. There have always been rumors going around about how people died working in the mill years ago. Sometimes at night, if you look in the window, apparently, you can still see ghostly figures, still dressed in old-time clothing. Across the street from the mill is a dirt parking lot that telephone companies would park their work trucks in and grab them in the morning. I had just picked up my friend, and we were driving back to my house. As we were driving by the dirt parking lot, we noticed something. The telephone company trucks were big, and you could see underneath them on the other side of one of the trucks. I saw a pair of legs and feet, like someone was just standing there motionless. The legs were very pale, standing out in the darkness. There were no shoes, just bare feet. It kind of looked like they were the legs of a child around 8 years old. As we kept driving and passed the truck, the feet and legs disappeared. We were going fast that there was no way, if it was an actual person, they could have ran off before we passed them. I asked my friend if he saw that, thinking I was crazy. And he said, "You mean the white legs and feet?" he asked. To this day, I still hope it was our imagination, playing tricks on us. And sometimes I wonder if a child may have died working in the mill many years ago, back when child labor was legal. That story is just to establish that me and this same friend can confirm with each other that we're not crazy, and we did see something otherworldly. This last event happened to me and my same friend as the ghost legs. It was late at night, and I was driving him home after coming home from the movies. Let me remind you that I live in a very rural, woodsy town. We were on this stretch of road, close to his place with woods on either side, not driving very fast. The speed limit for that road is 20 miles an hour. Just remembering this next part as I write this chills me to the absolute bone. As we're driving along, this thing flies over the road, just above the tree line. It flew next to a streetlight, which lit the creature up pretty good. At first, I just thought it was some type of bird, but as more of it appeared by the light of the streetlight, I realized this thing was way too big to be a bird of any type. The thing we saw had the body roughly the shape and size of a large wolf, but with short fur. It had bat-like wings, big enough to support its weight and size. The creature had front and back legs, unlike a bird, and also had a tail. Luckily, I didn't see it long enough to get a good description of its head, and I'm glad. I was already completely paralyzed with fear. Later on, my friend claimed that it had red eyes. The whole time this was happening, my friend and I did not say a single word. The rest of the way to his house, we said nothing. When we finally pulled his driveway, I shut off the car, and we both began freaking out. I was hoping I was going crazy, and to this day, I would think I was, but somebody saw the exact creature I did. We went on inside and told his brother he thought we were crazy, and after that long while, we told nobody because who would believe us? To this day, I don't know what kind of creature we saw that night. Just thinking about going in the woods in that town now really scares me. If anyone has any idea what we might have seen, or any strange creature stories around the New England area, I would love to hear them. Thank you. About 4 years ago, we moved to our dream home, in the middle of farms and woods. We have 8 acres, which backs up against some protected land that is undeveloped. Mostly old farms and woods patched through them. We are between Oxford, Ohio, and, from what I recently read, the fabled Germantown, Ohio. We keep to ourselves, my wife and son and our dog. I've only met our nearest neighbor, a late 20s and early 30s female. I never see her leave. Her dad stops by from time to time. She doesn't work. One night, a few years ago, I went outside around 12:30 a.m. to walk the dog. I had a few beers on a Saturday night, as did my neighbor, most likely. She was hooting and howling, so I joined in the fun and howled back. No biggie. But this play started happening more and more. We started having weird stuff happen. Someone snapped our rooster's neck in the night and was coming on our property. So I set up trail cams. It didn't catch much, but some deer and coyotes. Bit one day, I went to check the cameras, and my SD card was missing, and the camera open. So I gave up on that idea. I'm a bit of a prepper. Okay, I'm a big prepper. So I turned the next few weekends into a full-on military operation to figure out who or what was coming onto our property. I got camoed up in a sniper ghillie suit and night vision. Had my night vision scope rifle out. Nothing. So, one night, it's Saturday again. Had a few beers, but not close to drunk by any means. Took the dog out when I heard the playful howl again. I thought it was my wife in the chicken coop, so I kept walking that direction. Nobody there. Huh. Weird. Must be the neighbor. So we got to the opening, to the 300-yard spread of brush and woods between our houses, and I saw what looked to be a naked person with long hair, kind of like a lion's and less hair on the body, but still a light dusting of body hair. It ran off upright. I didn't see a snout or anything like that. No fangs or glowing eyes. But I did get a weird feeling, like it was a big dog, wanting me to chase it. An overwhelming vibe, so to speak. It ran through the tall brush, and I lost sight. The initial contact was about 120 yards out, and it ran the other 150 to 180 yards quick. My dog didn't even seem to care. Sort of like it was a dog it knew. Not exactly sure what it was, but it did not seem evil or dangerous. My daughter is 30, and back in October or early November of 2020, she was about 3 blocks from home, driving down St. Anthony's Church Road at roughly 8:30 p.m. This road is rural and very dark, except for the light on at a cemetery that you pass. That's when she noticed something darker than a shadow and huge go across that whole cemetery in a matter of seconds. This scared her enough to call me as soon as she got home to tell me that how this was so upsetting to her and she was now sick to her stomach. She was bothered by this and experienced nightmares, and her and I were surprised at how this had shaken her up so much. She still at the time never heard of Dogman. So, a couple of days later, she was walking down across the road to the mailbox and a small creek with a wooded area on both sides across from where she walks, and she said that something or someone was watching her. When she walked, it walked. When she stopped, it stopped. And she experienced the same feeling in the stomach when she sees nothing or no one in the wooded area, since she's looking right through the wooded area because it's not thick as it was in the summer. She said that she could not hear anything, no nothing, and it freaked her out really badly, since nothing like that has ever happened to her before, except for riding past in the cemetery a few nights prior. Anyway, she hurried up and went back to her house and called and told me that she's being stalked by something that's gotta be paranormal or invisible. That's when I told her that it could be a dogman. First off, this happened about 3 years ago. I was asked to put my encounter on this forum. I live in rural Tennessee, farmland, small town USA. So one night, early in the fall, my friend called me and wanted help with a newborn calf. I told him sure, jumped on my dirt bike, and headed over there. When I got there, he had done delivered the calf, but the calf-skin mother was freaking out, mooing a weird kind of sound. My friend said he was going to lock her in the barn. Would I stay with the calf? So I did. He was gone not even 3 minutes, when I caught a nasty wet dog dead animal smell coming from my right. It was putrid. I thought a great dead deer was rotting nearby when I heard some branches breaking about 40 feet off to my right. I thought, great. Now a bobcat or some dog was going to be eating the rotting deer and make the smell even worse. But to my surprise, the smell moved. So I'm like, okay, smells don't move. So I shined my light in the area and caught a glimpse of something black. It was a blur moving so fast. I thought a bear, but I've never seen a bear in these woods before. Just then, I heard something to my left, and I turned towards the sound, shining my light in front of me, about 20 feet, and what I can only describe as a werewolf-like thing, right out of a horror movie. It was standing on 2 legs, glaring at me. My mind was thinking that this is not real. It can't be. But there it was, 7 foot tall easily. I'm 6'4", 280 pounds, no small guy. But this thing made me look small. It was sniffing the air, and it showed a mouth full of teeth. Then I heard a branch break from my right. I turned, and there was another one, but smaller, about 6 feet tall, standing on 2 legs. So I positioned myself so I could see both creatures, when the bigger one freaked me out even more. It took its arm and pointed with the huge clawed hands at me. I was truly terrified, and remembered the newborn calf still hiding in the grass. So I reached down and pushed the newborn between my legs. The larger creature looked at me, shook its head, like to say, no, don't do that. Just then, I remembered that I had my father's World War II Colt 45 that he had passed down to me. I pointed that at the larger creature, thinking I'm going to get one shot and die, but I was going out fighting. Just then, the larger creature made a weird clicking noise. It hurt my head, made my eyes water, and to my relief, the larger one went down on all fours and took off with the smaller one beside him. Like I said, it's been 3, almost 4 years since my encounter. I never told anyone. I mean, who would believe you that you saw a real werewolf? I mean, you hear about Bigfoot, but werewolves anyway. You can believe me or not. I truly don't care. I know for a fact what I saw. I lived in an apartment complex when I was in high school, and loved to hunt there. It was only 6 feet away from the parking lot. I almost lived in those woods. They had beautiful oak trees there with trails under them. So one day, I was hunting with my bow in a cow pasture, which had a barbed wire fence separating it from these woods. I had shot a rabbit there just a few days earlier with a razor blade arrow. I was walking down the fence line in the pasture, heading towards the corner where the fence went off to the left, towards the apartments. That's when I heard something large in the woods, coming straight towards me. Crashing through the brush, actually. It sounded bipedal. It made me really curious because it was very thick woods, and hard to walk through. Besides that no one ever went in this part of the woods except for me. These were like my woods. I called out, "Who are you? What are you doing here?" No answer. I repeated it. Still no answer. Yet they just kept coming closer. They got about 25 feet from me. It made me mad. So I almost jumped over the fence and ran over there to see who was only 25 feet away from me and did not want to answer. But then I remembered that I'd seen a man in his 40s with a long-barreled revolver on his hip across the creek, coming from an area that had an abandoned barn, and that area always gave me the creeps. I just never went over there. So, I caught myself right before I jumped over the fence and said, "No, something does not seem to be right here." By this time, I was at the corner of the fence line. I turned left and continued to follow the fence line towards my apartment. Then, I heard bipedal steps of this, what I thought was a person, because 40 years ago, we did not believe in Bigfoot or anything like that. I stopped walking, and it stopped. So I started walking again, and it also started walking alongside of me, about 25 feet. The woods were very thick in Louisiana, so you could not see through them. As I walked, I made sure that my razor blade arrow was well notched, and never took my eyes off who was walking parallel from me. And then it came to a part of the woods that I could never get through, because there was a different type of bush there, about 5 to 6 feet tall, and they were very, very sharp. Once, I shot a bird there, tried everything I could to get in there to get my bird, and could not crawl under it or over it. I was not afraid to go through the brush. I had scratched my left eye twice and had to get the top layer of skin removed by an eye doctor from going through the brush in those woods. This thing started crashing through this brush. As I began to walk very fast, then I just saw for a split second a very, very tall black figure crashing through. It was solid black, maybe 8 to 10 feet tall. It had to have been huge to step over the top of these 5 to 6 foot tall bushes. I could see from about the chest up. It had its arms in the air and out in front of it, and its torso leaned forward, but did not see any clothing. I thought that was weird. That's when it hit me, that it was not a man, but it was something else. I had no idea what it was. All I saw was like a black silhouette type figure. I took off running, and it did also, paralleling me all the way to the parking lot. When it reached a large tree right there, next to the parking lot, it sounded like it started smashing and snapping large tree limbs from the tree, like maybe 4 to 6 inches in diameter. I jumped the fence, running into my apartment, which was facing the woods, about 75 feet away. I never got the impression that it was a Bigfoot. I thought it was something paranormal, but did not have a clue to what it was, since we didn't have internet back then. For years, I thought about why this creature decided to do this to me. The only thing I could think of was that I shot that rabbit a few days earlier and immediately cut it open to clean it in the pasture. But as I began to skin it, I saw that it had worms under the skin, so I left it there. These woods were not very large, only about a quarter mile by a half a mile long, and in an urban setting. So I said to myself, no way it could be a Bigfoot. But what was it? So I did not shoot anything. I don't eat. And do not even try to break the smallest twig when I'm in the woods, no matter how thick they are, or smash down any grass or make a trail. And when I pee, if it's possible, I dig a small hole and then cover it up. If I have somebody with me, I ask that they whisper, and feel like we should respect our woods and the animals, of course, and all the paranormal creatures that live in it. What do you think it is that I saw? Hey, what lurks beneath? It's Dean here again, writing you back with some more interesting stories. So I got in contact with a friend who also happens to be close relatives and friends to some Appalachee and Seminole in the Florida area. If you don't know, there are quite a few native tribes to the entire Florida Panhandle area, The Appalachian and Seminole are just a couple of them. But what I find interesting is their stories. This friend, when I started talking to him about the alligator man, or the half-man, half-dinosaur that I saw, that I wrote to you about, he started telling me some stories from his friends that they shared with him, all while they encountered in the old time in the swamps and Everglades. Things like old men shape-shifting into alligators, things of that nature. And they believe that the alligator man, or at least some of the tribes, believe he is a cursed witch, while others believe he is a shapeshifter capable of taking on form of half creature, half man, thus appearing like a dinosaur man, or like a half man, half alligator. I guess there are other stories about an actual clan, modern day mind you, of evil shapeshifters living in the Everglades that transform into horrific looking creatures, like the alligator man for example, or lizard-like creatures, or worse, that are still active to this day. They take this form because taking that physical form allows them greater strength than in their human form, and they're able to have greater power, can conceal themselves, and invoke fear and terror on the innocent. And while I firmly believe the tribes of this region have dealt with this kind of thing firsthand, it's all just speculation, since we don't have any definitive proof. But these are kind of the best guesses, so I wouldn't be too surprised if none of this information was that far off from the actual truth. Anyway, just thought this little piece of information might prove useful to you in your search for the truth. For my 25th birthday party, me and a friend of mine were driving up to Vegas. I had never been to Vegas in my life, and figured, since I missed my 21, 25 will be the time to fully celebrate. We were taking the 15 up into Las Vegas. We were maybe only a few miles outside of town. It was still pretty deserty. We saw what I think was a skinwalker. Not by the road, but off in the distance a little. My friend saw it first and mentioned it to me. I looked to see what he was talking about, and off in the distance was this really pale, thin figure. Looked to be in tattered black clothing, almost kind of like a robe you would see from the Middle East. Full head gown too, and these weird antlers protruding from its head. It was very tall and very slender, maybe 9 feet tall if I had to guess. It was out there, so it's just a guesstimate, but it looked very out of place. I didn't see any details, but it was just standing there. It very well may have not have been a skinwalker, but my friend and I were thoroughly creeped out, and could just not understand, while in this heat, in the desert sun and day, while anybody in their right mind would be out there in the middle of nowhere, wearing dirty, tattered black clothing, like that, covering their entire body, and a headdress, just standing there, being perfectly still. It was very creepy, and very strange. I'm not really sure how to categorize my experience with the paranormal or unknown, but this was back in the late 80s, and I was on a little road trip across country. This particular event, I was staying in a cheap motel, just outside of Fort Collins in Colorado. I remember being woken up in the middle of the night from my motel room by a very familiar voice calling my name from outside my motel room, calling me to come here. Here's the weird thing. The voice was my grandfather, who'd been dead for well over 20 years at this point. It was very creepy, and I considered it either me dreaming or just a coincidence. But the more it spoke, the angrier its tone became, because I wasn't coming to the door and coming outside. And even weirder, it knew my name, or the person knew my name, whatever it was. I'm gonna say thing, because it gave me complete sinister evil vibes, like I knew it had to be more than a person. There was just something not right about all of it. I stayed in bed, tried to sleep the best I could, and this went on for maybe another 10 or 15 minutes before ceasing completely. I checked out of there maybe 8 a.m. and I was gone. I didn't stick around to investigate or see who or what it came from. That was it for me. Not me, but my grandfather. He has seen some very disturbing things out in Red Lake Reservation, which is in Black Duck, Minnesota. I am full-blooded native, but because of where and how I grew up, I'm pretty detached from my culture and heritage, only knowing a little bit, but I have a very deep interest in the paranormal, and even cryptids. I'm not exactly sure what our tribe's definition of a skinwalker is, like the Navajo down in the Arizona range, but this is something else that's very similar, like it, but its own thing. My grandfather would describe it as a tall white figure with large elk-like horns protruding from its shoulders, back, as well as head. He tells me, or has told me, he would always see it wandering around the lower Red Lake. The Red Lake Reservation is actually one large lake. The southern half is called the Lower Red Lake, with a very small channel leading to the upper larger body, known as the Upper Red Lake. He's been all around there, fishing, living, and just doing things that grandfathers do in his time. He's seen this creature multiple times, and has given off very bad energy. He told me that he believes that it comes from beneath the earth. I'm not sure if he means like from hell or what, but says this thing has targeted him and has tried and attempted to come after him, calling out to him multiple times with voices of his dead relatives, and even his dead wife, and even his own voice and children. Says sometimes that he'll see it on the highway nearby, or even around his trailer. And personally, I think the most haunting was when he was trying to get into his truck one early morning, and this thing comes out of nowhere, behind the trees, and nearly approaches him, speaking to him telepathically, explaining to my grandfather he does not belong here, and if he continues to stay, this thing is going to rip out his heart. Said this creature was evil, had a face and eyes that were black, and had long, jagged elk-like horns. I don't know if that fits the description of a skinwalker, or what, or if maybe our tribe has its own skinwalker. I don't know, but it's terrifying to think about. I've asked my grandfather too if he believes it was a shapeshifter, someone who has transformed, and while my grandfather isn't sure, he knows one thing: this being is of dark energy. When I was 9 years old, my older brother, who was 15, and my mom and dad, we all went camping for a week in Prince Albert National Park, which is up in Canada. The adventure was a blast. We had a lot of fun on the lake, and just the area around. We did all sorts of stuff. But my story is actually my brother's tale. One night, when he got out of the tent, he tells me that he believes he saw a monster, which also appeared to take different forms and shape, according to him. He said he was out peeing by a tree, and behind the tree, not the one he was urinating on, but another one close by, a large wolf came behind it, and when he said he stared at it, he was frightened by its face. He said that it had a very human-looking face. The way he described it was half wolf and half man, and very striking evil yellow eyes. Said that it stared him down, as if my brother, peeing on this tree, had disturbed this wolf-man thing. Then, it looked away from him, went behind some brush, and after about 20 seconds, came back out as a very large brown bear, with also a distorted face. This freaked my brother out, and so he ran back to the tent, freaking out to me and both my mom and dad. They tried to calm him down and just explain that it was probably just a trick of the dark and that he was just seeing the wildlife. I talked to him about it the following day. He told me about it in more detail. Basically what I just told you. He said the face just looked far too wrong, far too human to be an actual animal. He's a firm believer in shapeshifters and all of that. I didn't even know what any of that was at 9 years old. But the older I've gotten, I've come to be educated on the subject, and I do believe his story. He was pretty genuinely frightened. I mean, I see no incentive for him to make that up, or to fake it. He had nothing to gain, and he was never a prankster, and never one to pull any stunts like that, or make up stories or lie. So I have no reason not to trust him. I am aware, though, that shapeshifters and people taking shape of animals is generally a Native American thing. I know nothing of the tribes in that area, or the things they practice, so I couldn't tell you any of that. But I can tell you that it does sound like it might be a case of a shapeshifter to me, and it must have just been wandering through the woods, maybe looking for somebody or something. My brother just so happened to leave his tent at night and go relieve himself. Maybe this thing or person was not too far away, heard him and saw him, and apparently was startled. Then went behind the nearby brush to take a different form and shape, which my brother clearly saw. When I asked him about this, he just said there was no way that a wolf that looked very uncannily like a man could go behind some brush and within only a matter of 30 seconds disappear, and a large brown bear walks out, having the same distorted human-like face. It really makes you question the secrets of the wild and what really goes on in the forests when nobody's around. Maybe there's a lot more to guardians of the forest than we think. I like to think of it that many Native Americans are endowed with specific magic, and they're able to shapeshift and guard parts of the woods. From what, I don't know, and from who, I don't know. Why? Well, maybe they think of themselves as guardians. That's if my theory on shapeshifting is even correct. For all I know, he could have saw a demon. I'm not too sure. But the shapeshifter thing sounds much more plausible, if you believe in cryptozoology and all of that. So I wanted to ask you, do you believe my brother saw a shapeshifter that night? And what are the tribes around that area? What do they practice? Do they have any sort of skinwalker shapeshifter thing in their tribe? Is there anybody that could be considered a black witch and practice dark magic to shapeshift? Or do they maybe have any guardian figures that would shapeshift and protect the forest? I'm very curious. Please, let me know what you find. Thanks. My story, as incredibly disturbing as it is, has been validated by a story actually you shared a while back. I don't remember the exact video, but it was one of the undead creature videos you posted. In it, someone shared a story with you about how they worked at a hotel and they kept smelling this awful rotting flesh smell all throughout. I think eventually the person had to keep checking all around the hotel, but there was no source of the smell, till they finally went around the building and saw this rotting, undead-looking creature that ran off on all fours. I don't exactly remember the description, because I heard it over a month ago, but it really struck a chord with me, because me and my brother, who worked at a smaller restaurant at the edge of a small town, had a very similar experience. We both saw this creature. We both smelt the smells and felt the fear. So we know we're not crazy. Nobody else but us saw and witnessed this thing. And a lot of the details are actually shared in that same encounter. A lot of the same things. The rotten, horrible death smell that you could smell so strongly in the building and outside. Only thing is, for us, none of the customers in the restaurant or the other staff seemed to notice, which was weird. But my brother and I could easily smell it. My brother was the first to see it. He was going out back to dump things that were left in the freezer, old expired product that hadn't been used, or maybe violated health code, something along those lines. As he was emptying them into the back dumpster, this thing approached him from the back. He said he was so terrified, he ran inside. The way he described it to me, I don't know if you've ever seen the old 2002 Resident Evil movie with Mila Jovovich. It's the first one in the series. There are these dogs in the show, or the movie, that are supposed to be zombie dogs. They're just Doberman pinschers, and they have fake gore and muscle tissue wrapped all over them. They're supposed to be rotting-looking dogs. Well, this is what he saw, and he described it as that. Except he said this Doberman pinscher was taller than him, walking on two legs, but looked to be decaying and rotting. He told me, in the back light, he could fully see its exposed ribcage and partial muscle tissue and organs. Said it looked like it had been dead and crawled out of a grave. Said part of its face was rotting and bone and tissue exposed. The death smell also strongly carried around it, but said it had no problem standing and walking approaching him, was even growling, with blood and saliva pouring out of its mouth, but just stood there growling at him, as if contesting him. That was a night that I wasn't working. I was probably out with my own girlfriend. He ran back inside, carefully locking the door. He never spoke a word of it until a month or so later, when I had my own encounter. I too was working in the back kitchen and had to go outside to my car for something. Just a little note. Since our staff is so tiny, the manager, the owner, and the staff all park their cars in this little nook at the back of the restaurant, since the main side and front are for paying customers. I had to walk and get my inhaler out of my car, which is maybe 50 feet at most from the back door. As I'm approaching my car, I hear plopping or trotting sounds, like something on all fours is coming towards me. It sounded large, like a horse. And instantly, as soon as I hear it, I'm confused because I'm like, there's nothing out here. We're kind of in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by woods and empty fields. The area beyond here is used for agriculture, and all the rest is just undeveloped land, maybe a factory or two not too far away. Like I said, we're pretty much at the edge of town, in the middle of nowhere. I don't even think there's really any houses nearby. So why would a large animal be approaching me? But as I turned to look, the same monstrosity that approached my brother was coming my direction, except this thing was on all fours. And his description and account that he would later tell me after me telling him this is just as accurate. And this thing did indeed look like that Doberman pinscher from the movie, covered in rotting flesh, almost kind of bloody, except this thing was on all fours and had white glowing eyes coming towards me. It was maybe about 100 feet away, but even in the dark evening, I saw it clear as day, and because of the way the lighting was, I saw more than enough details for me to also run back in the restaurant and lock the door. Later on that evening, when my brother showed up for his shift, I told him, pulled him in the back, what exactly happened, what I saw. He got quiet, looked down at the floor, told me he needed to tell me something too. He explained to me he saw the same thing, about a month, maybe 5 weeks prior to this happening. Said he's not sure what it is, scared him half to death. Then we talked about the Resident Evil movie reference, and we're both just like, yeah, it looked just like that dog, or the dogs in that movie, except real. Then we kind of talked the idea of it maybe being a zombie werewolf. We don't know. That's why we thought it would be a good idea to reach out to you, especially after hearing a similar thing happen to that poor man or woman who worked in the hotel, who I guess saw something very similar. Now, before I end this story, before the actual sightings, for maybe about 6 to 7 weeks before this actual sighting, my brother and I, We didn't know it at the time because we never said anything to each other, but we both kept smelling a rotting meat smell, thinking something was going bad in our kitchen, or maybe outside in the dumpster. We kept periodically checking, but nothing. We couldn't find a trace of the odor, and it was driving us crazy. And worst of all, it would come and go. There'd be some shifts you wouldn't smell anything, and there'd be other shifts where it seemed to come and go constantly, and not just a little whiff here and there. I mean, it would smell like you were blindfolded and trapped in a very 10 by 10 room filled with dead, rotting cadaver animals. Then, maybe 10 seconds later, it's as if that never happened. This would come and go, and sometimes it would be so strong and linger for so long that you would have to look around, thinking either you're going insane or somebody is playing an elaborate prank on you. Well, we never could figure it out, nor did we ever mention anything to anybody else, at least at the time. Nobody else seemed to notice, as I originally said. After my brothers and I's sighting, we also talked about the smells that we'd been smelling for the past 6 or 7 weeks. That's when I found out that my brother too had been smelling it. I guess he, that I didn't know at the time, had asked our manager and owner. They had no idea, nor had they heard any complaints. So that's our story. About 4 or 5 months later, my brother and I would both quit, for different reasons. Our manager was just kind of skimping us out on hours, and things were kind of becoming toxic in the workplace. Anyhow, as far as the undead demon thing, or zombie werewolf, call it whatever you will, we never saw it or smelt it after that. I still can't describe to you what exactly it was, but it was terrifying for both my brother and I. I hope we never see it again. With my sighting story, I'm just going to flat out tell you, there's no room for mistaken identity. It was not nighttime, nor was it dark, or anything prohibiting accurate visibility. This was a beautiful sunny day, clear skies, right about 1:30, 2 p.m. in the afternoon. Nothing to stop me from seeing this monster. This is in the state of Ohio, and I was driving northbound on the 73, which also, I didn't know this at the time, but happens to be right next to the Serpent Mound Historical Site, which, if you didn't know, is like a giant statue or mound, or something. I've never actually seen it, only been told about it. Even though I live in the area, I probably should check it out. Anyway, it's an ancient Indian burial ground. Imagine that. So you could probably already know where this is going. So, like I said, I was driving northbound on the 73, and as I'm coming around a bend in the road, there's no other cars on the road at this point, mind you. There's this thing in the road, my lane actually, walking down the road in my direction. So instead of your typical slamming on the brakes and seeing this creature, I sped up and swerved around it, thinking at first it was some idiot in a costume. But as I swerved around it, its reaction, it's the way it looked, I realized it was not a person playing Halloween. This was something else. It wasn't until later that I put all the pieces together and was told by other people and friends and family. They've seen this thing too. What I saw looked like a skinwalker, or maybe a wendigo. I can't think of any pinpoint specific illustrations that I could point you in the direction of, but this thing looked like an upright walking dead deer, if that makes any sense, which it probably doesn't. So imagine taking a buck, making it fully stand up erect on 2 legs or hooves, and walk just like a person. Now take that, and add in a little bit of Pet Cemetery to it. Rotting flesh, its entire stomach exposed, ribs and bone, everything, like this thing just crawled out of the ground, covered in dirt and other nasty stuff. Part of its face, if not most of it, rotted away, and yet it was walking like it had no problems with rigor mortis, or having been dead. And because this happened in full daylight, I saw everything. Guts, muscle tissue, everything. I only saw it for maybe 5-10 seconds before I swerved around it. It never continued to look over at my car. It just kept going in that same lane, southbound. Had I not stopped, we would have had a head-on collision. It's like it was on a mission, staying in that lane, following the road somewhere. When I swerved around it and sped up, it didn't even bother to look behind it, slow down, nothing. It just kept going. And I watched it in my rearview mirror for a couple of seconds briefly as I made and rounded the bend before it disappeared. I remember thinking to myself, what was that thing? Well, I would later on tell my friends after a couple of beers what I saw, and I guess they too have seen something very similar. One of them being a native, actually, and their entire family native in the area. They're the ones who actually told me about the Serpent Mound, and that apparently it draws great magical power, dark magical power. There's often rituals, seances, and other occultic practices and sacrifices, which apparently draw in more dark energy, causing these beings to manifest into a physical state. I remember telling him, "So you're telling me I saw an interdimensional demon or creature?" Basically, that is what I saw, or so I believe. I didn't smell anything. My windows were rolled up, and this was early fall, right before the leaves started falling. I think things just started to change. I can't be too sure. So it was after Labor Day, I know that, but before mid-October. But I guess that's not too important. I had asked this friend of mine, whose name I won't share to protect his identity, if this could have been a Wendigo or a Skinwalker, since I've heard those names thrown around, but don't really know anything about them or the lore on them. He explained to me no. The creature I saw is of an entirely different line of demons, summoned by dark magic, or at least drawn by dark energy. Why it was following that road, I asked him to explain that. He believes, he can't be 100% sure, but he believes it was following its way back to the mound, or close to it. And when I looked on Google Maps, finding the exact spot in which I had the sighting, the mound is actually southeast of that location, which would actually very thoroughly explain why it was walking that way. But why wouldn't it just cut through the woods? He doesn't know, neither did I. And I find it strange that it wasn't worried about being seen, that it would just blindly walk in the middle of the road, staying down that lane in oncoming traffic. I guarantee I was not the only one to see it that day. Oh, and by the way, this thing was easily 8 to 9 feet tall, very large, like again, had antlers just like a buck, looked just like an upright walking dead, rotting buck, although it kinda had more human features to its face. That's all I can really recall for now. If you have any more questions, please shoot me an email back, and we'll talk. I'm starting to think that these magical burial grounds by Indians have more to them than we ever have thought. That they actually do draw in dark energy, and they actually do maybe allow the manifestation of things we can never imagine. Look, I don't know what it is you want to call these things. Werewolves, dogmen, dog soldiers, I don't know. But these things are flat out violent and very dangerous. Let me tell you my story that nearly cost me my life. For this story, we have to go back to wintertime of 2009. Somewhere around February or March, we had passed the worst part of winter, but it was still very wet and very cold. This night I was driving home, and was driving down a steep mountainside, filled with trees and forest all around me. The roads were very curvy, and although it was above freezing, you still had to be careful. Things were very wet. As I'm making my way down to the base of the grade, there is a sharp turn. As I'm doing this, I noticed off to my left, there was some sort of, at the time, large animal trailing me through the woods. I got ready to slam on my brakes, thinking a large buck was about to emerge through the woods and run across the road. But as I slowed down, that didn't happen. In fact, whatever this was following me also stopped too. That's when I got a little unnerved, and I began driving. Then, this thing quickly followed suit, staying within the tree line, but also keeping up with my vehicle at about 30 to 35 miles an hour, which for a deer, if that was the case, isn't a hard feat. This goes on for maybe a mile or two, and now I'm beginning to feel uncomfortable about the situation. No animal of that size that I can see from the shadows follows a vehicle like this. This almost felt predatory in nature. Hear me out. My gut instinct was screaming at me to go faster. Already, I knew this wasn't a bear. This wasn't a wolf, and I know cougars or mountain lions don't get this big. Something was following me, and whatever it was, I don't know. So I began to speed up to about 40, 45. On the part of the road I was at, since I had passed down the grade, it was now straight, beginning to curve slightly to the right. And as I got to the curve, this horrendous-looking thing burst through the woods and charged at the backside of my small little Nissan truck. This thing shot with incredible speed and latched itself onto my back rear tire. The sheer force of the impact of it latching onto my back left tire was so strong, it sent my vehicle swerving, and as this happened, it tore the back left tire completely off the axle, along with the rubber and the frame, and God knows what happened. In this motion, the entire truck flipped several times and landed on the side of the road, all while I remained in the truck. Of course, the accident and impact left me unconscious, with a severe concussion and several scratches and bruises. But thanks to my seatbelt, I did not end up being projected to the windshield, being smashed by my truck. The next thing I remember, police are pulling me out of the vehicle, and I remember having a light shone in my face, probably checking for vitals. And then I lost consciousness again. Then I woke up again in the hospital, and I had a doctor come in, maybe 15-20 minutes after I regained consciousness, to tell me briefly what happened. Apparently there was an accident, and, luckily, some passerby drove by, saw that I was unresponsive, called 911, and you probably know the story from here. This all took place over the course of several hours. Luckily, even though I had a concussion and scratches and bruises, I'm okay, and nothing long-term or severe happened to me. When they had asked what happened, I immediately recounted seeing this horrible thing out of my side mirror, charging towards my vehicle. Before I even spoke, I knew if I told them what I really saw, they would probably immediately attribute it to me not being sober. I've never done a lick of drugs in my life. Sure, I'm drinking now and then, but I'm not really much of a drinker. In fact, I much prefer the life of sobriety more than anything else. So, I bit my tongue, waited a few seconds, and then told them I saw a large bear charge after my vehicle. The doctor's eyes became wide, and he asked me, "Are you sure a bear can tear the tire off a car like that? What did you do to provoke it?" I just looked at him and shrugged my shoulders. I did speak to the police briefly as well, giving them a very similar story. I couldn't afford to tell them the truth. I knew I wouldn't be taken seriously if I did. They probably would have either discredited me, attributed it all to drugs or alcohol, or threw me in the loony bin. None of the three I really wanted. Luckily, I was able to get a new truck soon afterwards, since the truck was completely totaled. But forget about those irrelevant details. I know what you're wanting to hear about. The thing that attacked me and my truck. To be honest with you, I have no idea what animal it was. I've never seen or heard of anything that looked like it. It did resemble a werewolf, I'll be honest with you. But I don't know what you want to call it. I've heard people refer to it as a dogman, and I know the concept of a werewolf is somebody transforming under a full moon. I don't even know if that's the case, but this thing was definitely an upright, walking wolf-looking creature. Long, black hair, tall, pointy ears, striking yellow eyes, and a very large head, full of crocodilian-like teeth, protruding out of its lower and upper jaw. This thing had the strength of a lion, as it pounced with incredible speed, and as soon as it latched onto my back tire, just the sheer inertia sent my vehicle tumbling, and in that one fluid motion tore the tire right off the back of the axle, and that's when I had the accident. It all happened so fast that it might be hard to recount the exact details, but I don't know what it did afterwards. I don't know where it went to, and I don't understand why it pointed out my truck and attacked it when it did. After I crashed, I guess I was technically just a hanging piece of meat that it could have easily gotten to, had it shown the power already to clearly tear the tire off an axle. Why didn't it come after me? I don't know. And who knows how long I was really sitting there, hanging upside down, until the passerby found me. The road I was traveling down isn't well traveled, and it could have been easily 30+ minutes before somebody even drove by and saw me. Makes me shudder to still think about. I don't know how this winter's been for you, in whatever state you're living in, but over here in western Pennsylvania, it's been pretty crazy. Crazier than usual, which is saying a lot, considering we're a state that gets hit with tons of snow every year. I think somewhere of around 100 inches or so every year. Like I said, it's a lot of snow. You better get used to it if you're living out here. Another thing we have a lot here in Pennsylvania is wildlife, which brings me to the reason why I'm writing you. I found tracks outside my barn this morning. Tracks I don't quite understand. They're clearly made from a canine, but no canine I know gets this big. I'll have to upload the pictures and send them to you via email, but I didn't want to waste your time, so I thought I'd reach out to you first, get confirmation that it's okay, and send them over. They're pretty large in size, easily 12 inches if not bigger. We're talking huge canine tracks. Whatever made this had to have easily been the size of a grizzly bear, if not bigger. I know that doesn't even sound possible, but I cannot think for the life of me what dog breed could make these. The other thing that really bothers me is the track pattern is not quadrupedal, meaning it isn't from a four-legged animal, judging by the way the stride is. It appears to be more bipedal. You can clearly see the stride pattern. It's like somebody was walking on two legs, walking around. And the other weird thing, wearing fake werewolf canid boots. The impression in the snow is quite deep, meaning that whatever made these tracks not only had tremendous stride, but must have weighed a considerable amount. I'm around 270 pounds, a bigger guy, if you will, and I'm 6'2". Even me, with all my snow gear on and my boots, can't even make half the indent as these do. So something is out there doing this. I know of Dogman, and I've heard there are legends all around the entire Great Lakes area, from Wisconsin to Michigan, and even all over western Pennsylvania. I've never seen one myself, but I've heard many stories from friends and family growing up. I never really wanted to believe they existed, but now, I guess I have no choice but to second guess. The footprints actually come out of a small section of woods that back up to acres and acres of national forest. This small section of woods kind of tails out, down to around where my house is and where the neighborhood is. I would say from my barn to the small section of woods, or tree line, is maybe 100 yards, but I haven't actually measured. The tracks lead all the way from the tree line to my barn, and then just seem to disappear. There's no traces of which direction it went, and I don't think it jumped on my roof, considering my barn is roughly 20+ feet high. So I'm not really sure what to make of this. The tracks just literally disappear right as they go up against my barn, and it's the back side of the barn, where there's no window, there's no door. I currently do not have any live animals, just old hay and old barn supplies, so I'm not sure if there was anything remotely interesting for whatever animal making this to get into. I don't know. I have far more questions than answers, and I'm hoping, with your aid, you can help me answer many of them. Thanks for your time. My grandfather, who, rest his soul, is now passed, used to work as a police officer and eventually a sheriff for well over 30 years of his life. One of the most horrifying stories he ever told me about was when he had gotten a call from a fellow. By the way, this was in the late 70s, early 80s. Which year, I don't exactly know. Anyway, they got a call from a fellow on a small farm nearby, having complaints about some unknown animal attacking and killing all the cattle. Upon arriving there, he said he was nearly attacked and killed by what he describes as a large upright dog that hid itself amongst the trees and would jump down at his car, nearly tearing the engine out of his vehicle and nearly taking my grandfather's life had he not shot it in his eye and blown it out. At least that's what he told me. He always had a really hard time retelling the story. He would shake really bad, and you could tell it really stirred him up. In fact, he didn't even like talking about it, and the only time he ever did is when I kept asking him to retell the story. I probably had him retell it to me at least 4 times, and guess what? The details never changed. His reaction was always the same. I think he suffered from mild PTSD from it. Said he had never seen an animal like it. But after that farm had continuous calls about similar situations. Livestock going missing. Cattle appearing dead and mutilated. He would never respond to the calls or have somebody else go and take care of it. Not after that. He also had a very hard time explaining that what happened to his car. He said that a bear or something larger than a bear attacked him. But as you would know, saying that kind of thing around town, especially in the small town my grandfather grew up in and policed in, didn't take him very far. In fact, he was often mocked, made fun of, and even risked his career at several points. I wish I could give you more details on what happened, but he never really did go into vivid detail of what the creature looked like, other than it was very tall, large, pitch black, and hid up in the trees. I do remember him using the term panther, like it very much so acted like a black panther in its movements and how agile it was, but said it clearly looked like a very large dog. Same color though, pitch black, had massive claws, and said he can never forget about how striking its red amber eyes looked. Anyway, I know it's not too much of a story, but I feel like I would chip in my family's creepy Dogman story, because I feel like it's pretty relevant, especially with how popular Dogman is. Plus, after that, we have no idea what happened. My grandfather eventually retired, about 16 years or so after the incident, so the mid to late 90s. He never dealt with anything like that again, never really talked about it, and then he passed away sometime after. So, unfortunately, he's not alive now to get more information out of him. As far as that farm, well, it's only about 25-30 minutes away from my house currently. Do I have any plans to go around it and visit it? No. But, here's another thing. I guess that farm is very close to a national forest. How creepy is that? This happened directly to me. At the time of this story, I was a 12-year-old male who lived in California. For a summer trip, me and my family flew to Boise, Idaho, for a week to stay with my cousins. We stayed at their house for 2 days. Then came the best part. It was the best part. Until what happened, that is. On the 3rd day, we drove to a small city in the Rocky Mountains of central Idaho. They owned a cabin in Ketchum. The first day was fishing at nearby lakes, playing games, and meeting a few of the neighbors on the small street. Everybody we met was nice. It was amazing. I thought nothing could go wrong. Before I say more, here's a layout of the area. The room where I slept was at the back of the house. There was no fencing at the back of the backyard, because it was on the bank of a freezing cold river. Directly on the other side of the river was a huge mountain covered by thick forest pine trees. A small path starts on the other side of the river, but there's no bridge. There is a 1/4 of a mile down the road in front of our house. I went to bed that night, woke up at 2 a.m., needing to use the bathroom. I got up and did my thing, and headed back to my room. As I got into bed, I felt so hot that I opened my window. Not 15 minutes after that I opened my window, I heard the most terrifying screech coming from the forest. It was raspy but high-pitched. I know for a fact it wasn't human. I've heard stories from horror narration YouTube channels that often describe creatures that make weird noises that sound sort of human, but aren't. I heard it once more, but this time closer. In the morning when I woke up, we explored around town. At 7 p.m., me, my sister, and my cousins got permission from our parents to go explore the forest. I was uneasy, considering I had heard creepy, human-like noises in the night, and it was nearing night. The oldest cousin, Alex, who was 16, took a loaded pistol, a lighter, and a backpack of snacks. I carried a hunting knife and a flashlight. The cousin my age, Julia, just took a flashlight. My sister, Brianna, and the other cousin, Karina, who were 10, took some extra batteries and a small bag of candy each. We made our way across the bridge at the end of the street and back to the path on the side of the river, across from the house. All of us began the hike to the top of the mountain. We made it to the top of Bald Mountain in an hour and a half. The view from 9,000 feet was incredible. At 8:55, Alex and I figured it was time to head down and order the group to the path. At this point, it was dark now. The sun had fully set. Julia and I turned on our flashlights and shined them ahead as we walked. Some halfway down the mountain, which was about 45 minutes into the walk, I got the dreadful feeling you get when you're being watched and followed. Seconds later, something that was hiding in the bushes a few yards into the tree line that bordered the path ran off on our right. I brushed it off as some type of small animal. About 5 minutes after the incident, what we heard made me tingle with fear, and my heart dropped to my stomach. That same horrifying screech from last night echoed all through the forest, a mile or two away. I told everybody we needed to move faster, and we did. It went off again, but closer. Again, closer. Whatever that thing was, it was moving faster than us. We were full-on speed walking by then. That still wasn't fast enough, because soon the screeching stopped, and we heard loud steps 30 yards off to the right. I got that feeling of being watched. Alex took his gun, firing 2 shots in the general direction of the steps. The creature backed off, even though we thought he was gone. I still sensed we were being watched. As the river came into sight, it caught me and everyone else by surprise. I heard the path gravel crunching behind us. I looked back, and in the darkness, saw the outline of something that resembled a human on the path behind us, with about 200 yards of distance between us. I told Alex, and his face went pale when he looked. We told the rest of the group quietly, and on 3, we all broke out into a run towards the river. Whatever that thing was, it was extremely fast. When we reached the river, there wasn't time to get to the bridge 1/4 of a mile farther along the river, because this thing was catching up fast. We jumped in and swam across the ice-cold water. It got to the river just as we made it up the bank and into the backyard. Julia and I shined our flashlights and finally got a good look at what our pursuer looked like. It was a massive, hairy creature, standing about 7 feet tall. Huge, razor-sharp claws like a bear, eyes that glowed red, that illuminated when a flashlight shined on them. Alex shot at it, and it darted off with one final long screech. We all looked at each other in pure terror, shock, and surprise. Alex explained everything to our parents. They didn't know what to make of it, and had never heard anything like it. I'm thankful nothing happened to us, and that I noticed the creature behind us. If I had not, one of the others might not have noticed until it was too late. The next time I stay at that cabin, I'm not going alone in those woods at night. Never again. Not after that. This thing was seen by me and my friends on 2 separate occasions. I will explain the first encounter. It is a decently long one, so bear with me. Me and my older brother and 2 friends decided that we were brave and ventured off into my pasture. Now, I'm not in a rural area where my neighbors are super far away. I'm only about 20 minutes from town. Well, the oldest in the group was 12. So being dumb, we walked out to the field, and keep in mind it was freshly diced and plowed, so there were no weeds. Armed with a pocket knife and a big knife and a CO2 airsoft gun, we walked out to my back gate and into the field. We saw nothing but the buildings maybe a mile in front of us. We also have coyotes out there. Well, we made it to the back of the field, and a horrible smell came out of the ditch, so we ran back. When we turned back to the field, we saw 2 figures. I know for sure that they were not there 25 minutes ago. Stupidly, we shot the gun at them, and they stood up on 2 legs. We panicked and ran inside and watched a movie. The second time is very quick. I was playing basketball late at night, and I saw this thing jump from tree to tree. I was older. It was 2 years from the last sighting, and I was strangely not scared. I just went into the house and went to bed. That is my story of the strange creature I saw those nights. If you know what it could have been, please tell me. It all started when summer came, and me and my 3 friends, Lola, Katie, and Jennifer, were all planning to go camping. We were all excited and scared at the same time, because we were going camping alone. Lola had asked her father if he could drop us off. He agreed to take us. When the next day came, we started heading up. Lola's dad set up the camper that we were using. There was some spare blankets inside. Lola's dad finally got us in his truck and turned around. He stopped, rolled down his window, and told us no boys. There were 3 rooms in the trailer, 1 master bedroom, and 2 rooms with each bunk. Each room had a TV in it, so nobody cared what room they got. Everyone knew that Jennifer did not like small rooms, so we let her have the big one. I was in a room with Lola, and Katie was in a room by herself. I started unpacking when we heard a loud boom outside. I asked Lola if she heard that. She asked me what, and she said she heard the boom. We both looked at each other, startled, then continued unpacking. But something seemed off. It was the fact that Lola was so chill about it. I was done unpacking, so I walked outside and started a fire. Jennifer walked out, asked if I saw it. I asked, saw what? And then she starts freaking me out. She was staring behind me, panicking, her eyes darting back and forth, and then calming. I felt as if something was watching me, so I turned around. I saw an orb in the corner of my eye, reddish black, but by the time I turned to look, it was gone. I was so freaked out. I told Katie she could cook instead. We had our family's secret recipe of shepherd's pie, and a bunch of vanilla cupcakes. There were about a dozen cupcakes left in the open box, so we just left it on the table and went to bed. I could hear the TV coming from Katie's room, so I punched the wall and told her to be quiet. Right after I said it, everything went quiet, except for a small scream in the distance. It did not sound human. It gave me chills that ran down my spine. I dozed off, but woke in the middle of the night from hearing someone in the kitchen. I woke up Lola. Then we walked out into the small hallway that led into the kitchen. I saw Jennifer sitting on the table, staring straight ahead. Something touched me. I jumped and realized it was just Katie saying what was making those weird sounds. Jennifer was really creeping me out. She never stared into space this often. But then I noticed something in the corner of my eye. It was a shadowy figure. It was staring at Jennifer and slowly turned to face me and Katie. I froze. Katie froze. Jennifer then looked at us, as if being mind-controlled. Then the figure ran out the window, and Jennifer then dropped her head onto the table. We tried to wake her up, but ended up falling asleep. This experience still scares me, and is the only one of the creepiest things I've ever seen. Me and the others are still very close friends. We actually live together now. But we all remember that night. And whatever it was we saw, it turns out Jennifer remembers seeing it in the daytime, but was out cold when the rest of us saw it. It freaks us out even more, now knowing that our friend wasn't even awake and staring into space, eyes wide open.